Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of liftandshiftdev channel. So today we're gonna learn how to set up a NodeJs with Typescript and Postgres, and this also includes migration scripts to initialize your database. So let's get started. So I got my terminal here. So the first thing I'm gonna do is gonna init the repo. And I'm gonna go with all default options. Okay, so now if I open up my VS Code, so right now it doesn't have anything, and the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna install some packages. So because this is Node.js server, so we're gonna install Express. So I'm gonna press enter, and we're gonna install some dev dependency minus big D basically means a dev dependency. So we're gonna need Typescript for sure, and we're gonna need a types express and also types for Node.js API as well, and .env. This is to load up our environment variable, nomon to do development, and also tsnode to run no TypeScript. And I think that's all we need for now. So I'm gonna press enter and wait for this to finish. Okay, that's all good. Go back to our package.json. So I'm gonna create a source folder and also create a ts.json. Now if you watch my tutorial series on how to build a game website, I already explained all the tsconfig and what it properties and what it means. So you can watch that video in the description below, and it's gonna walk through all details about how to config TypeScript. So basically in this csconfig JSON file, I just declare the compiler options. So I want my code when it transpile is gonna go to ES5 format. And for development, I also use some ES6 syntax. And strict, basically this is basically add the use strict in the transpile file. So I don't need source map, and when I do the transpile, it's gonna put all the code into this folder, and the module that I want is common.js in the transpile code, and common.js is the module system for Node, and this is optional for you, but for me I like Node any type. And yeah, module resolution for Node is Node.js, and my base URL and path is this. So basically what it kind of allowed us to do is to import absolute path instead of relative path, and the base URL is current directory. So, and again, I exclude Node.js, no modules folder, and I only include the source folder as my source code gonna live in there. Okay, I'm gonna explain this a little bit more in when we start writing the source code. So now we have everything. Now we just need to define our script. Right, so the scripts that we want is the build script, and before I do the build, I'm gonna remove this folder, this folder for the previous code, and basically I just want to recreate everything from the scratch, where every time I build the code, So I'm gonna do a tsc to compile the code, and then it's gonna put the transpile code into the dist folder. And dev, this is the command we run every time we do development. And I'm gonna set the nomon watch source minus e ts node minus r.env/config. Okay, so this is tell the nomon to watch the file changes in the source folder, and this gonna also execute the ts node with the .env config and run the index.ts file in the source folder. The .env config means that it's gonna load up the .env file and apply that to the process.env variable or object. And we also need the start command. The start command basically for production. Okay, now we have all of this in place, so we're gonna do the index.ts file. So I'm gonna do a really basic Node.js setup here. So basically it's gonna listen on port 3001, and when you do the get request, it just send back the hello world. And actually when I go back to my .env, I'm gonna paste a port that I want in the .env, and the .env config gonna load that environment variable to the process.env here. And that's all we need to do for now. And let's start testing the build script. Okay, that is done. So you go back here, we have our index.js in the ES5 format with use strict. Now let's start testing the def command. And def, so it's starting a TS node and it said app running on port 3001. If you go to localhost 3001, you got a hello world. So that basically means that the app's working. So we have a basic Node.js app running at the moment with Typescript. So that's all good. The next thing we need to deal with is how to set up the database. In this case, I'm going to use Postgres. And the Postgres I'm going to use is going to be in the Docker container. So before I set up the DB, I'm going to create a Dockerfile for this Node.js. And I'm going to use node 14, node 16.0 slim, and my work there is going to be /app, and I'm going to copy everything in here to the container. One, I'm going to run yarn install, and then run yarn build to build the code, and then I can expose the port 3001 in container. And basically we can just do yarn start command. The yarn start basically here, so we build and then we run this index.js inside this folder. So this is really basic Dockerfile for the app. And we also need to add a Docker ignore file. So here I'm just do the .git. Now modules. So I just want to ignore these no modules in Git folder, so we don't need to copy all these inside our container. And then we gonna create a Docker compose file. Okay, so in this Docker compose file, we want basically two services. One is the app, our currently NodeJs app, and the second one is our Postgres database. And now we gonna specify the version of the Docker compose that we're gonna use. Here I'm gonna use 3.6, and now we declare the services that we wanna Docker to start up. So I'm gonna say this is app, and when I build the image of the container, is gonna get this current directory. So what it means here is if it expects this current directory, when it build the app, it's gonna look at the Docker file that I just declared before and build that image and run it. And ports, I'm gonna expose 3001. Expose the port 3001 from the container mapped to our host 3001 as well. And the env file, I'll just use my current .env for now, and it's gonna depends on DB service, which we're gonna declare now. So the image is gonna be Postgres 10.16. So I'm gonna use Postgres at version 10.16. So I'm gonna pull this image from the Docker Hub. And then I just I'm gonna do the Postgres user. So right here I'm gonna So right here I just set the environment variable for this DB container is the super user gonna be Postgres, and the password gonna be just password, and database name I just use Postgres name for now. So what it means here is that this is gonna be the default user for our database, and the app when connect to DB is gonna use this user and password to connect into this DB container. And I'm also expose the port, and the port here is gonna be 5432. So 5432 is default port for the Postgres. So this means that I'm gonna expose port 5432 container and up to the 5432 port of the host. And we also want to declare the volumes. So this is basically we gonna use the volume name db data, and it's gonna map to the var lib postgresql/data. And what it means here, if we do some work and we save some data in this db, and that's going to be replicated to our host db minus data directory. So every time we this container shut down, it doesn't actually erase all the data because it's already saved in this db.data, and which is pretty cool. So we don't have to reinitialize this db container every time, reinitialize the data for this db container every time, because all data is actually replicated to this db data directory, which is just convenient for development. and we just declare this volume. Okay, so now as you can see, we're gonna try to do a Docker compose up. Volume need to be a mapping. Okay. Okay, so this all the instruction here for the app is basically based on the Dockerfile that we declare right here. And now I just do a yarn install of all the packages. Okay, so if now I do a Docker PS, you can see that the Postgres is up, the app is up as well. Okay, now we have our app and DB is up. So the Docker compose working as fine for now. And I'm gonna shut both down with Docker down -v, and now we start working on how to connect the app to the DB container. So in here I'm gonna create a folder named DB, and inside here I'm gonna create an index.ts, and in this index.ts I'm gonna leave it empty for now. And what I'm gonna introduce you to is to have a migration script to initialize a Postgres database. Okay, so the idea of migration scripts is, for example, you have this database, but now you want to create a table within it or adding an index. You can manually go into the database container and create a table and adding index yourself, but the visibility of this kind of doing is very low. What we want to increase the visibility of our code to DBA or developer within the team. So the concept here is to have a migration script to create a table at an index and with versioning control as well. So basically, every time the developer wanted to do a manual DB script, they just need to add the migration script, basically the file in here, and every time the database look at these migration scripts, it's only pick the latest one, and it doesn't gonna look to the old migration scripts. It only look the latest one to run. This is gonna avoid any kind of conflicts. You have a multiple developers, manual config, or making query inside a database container. And now we have the migration scripts. Everything's become so much clearer. So for example, I have a create table.sql, and this is my really simple user profile table. So what it does here is just create a table with primary key with user ID. So now how can I actually run this migration script inside our database container? So the one way of doing that is to install a node Postgres. So node Postgres is a very famous library for connects NodeJs server to database. This is really useful Postgres client for Node.js app. And another thing I want to install is the Postgres migrations. Okay, so now if I go back to my .env, so I have my .env with some new environment variable here. So the DB host is where if you want to connect the app to the database container, the DB host need to match the service name here in the dockercompose file. So basically I'm gonna pass a DB and the port is 5432, and this is connection pool to the database. I just give it a default config for now, and this is gonna be password, and I think the user that we set here is a Postgres, and the database is Postgres as well. Okay, so this all set up, and I have a really simple script here. So PG is basically a no Postgres library, and the thing it do here is just do a config for connection pool to the database with all the environment variable, and then it connect to the database with this pool config, and it's gonna give me back a pool object, and I create a singleton DB instance that run the migration script that I created here. Basically what it does here is get a one client from the connection pool, and it's gonna use this client to run the migration script ./SQL, and then after that it's gonna release the client back to the pool for other requests to run. Now if you notice, one thing I want to emphasize is, if you notice, if I run the yarn build, when I run a yarn build, you see this in this folder, there's no migrations SQL anywhere. This is because TSC is only look at the TS file. So what we have to do, we have to manually move these migrations SQL file to the this folder every time we build. So we just gonna do a really simple copy source DB migration to this DB folder. Now do a yarn build again. It's gonna be in the this folder, and also if you look at this, actually I need to import the DB instance into in our primary index.ts. This is where the server starts. Notice I do the absolute import path. I don't need to go back. I don't need to do something like this, just because in our TS config we specified base URL and path. This is gonna allow us to do the absolute path import, and you see that the Typescript doesn't complain at all because it's already know the path. And then I'm gonna run db run migrations, which is I'm gonna run this function right here. Yeah, but there's one issues I'm gonna show you right now. If I do a yarn dev, you can see that it says it cannot find a DB module. Why is that? Because TSC by default it ignore all of this. Is only resolve relative path. For me that's just kind of a bug in the TSC. Why it doesn't support absolute path import, even though the compiler option specifies so. So one way to fix these issues is to install the transform Typescript, right? With the transform Typescript and with the help of the Typescript transform paths, we now can transpile code that's gonna take care of absolute path imports in our source code as well. So the one thing I need to change is add extra t in front of tsc. This gonna do transformation, the correct transpile for us. Now if you do a yarn build again, if you do a yarn build again, it's transpile that absolute path into the correct relatively path. As you can see, the index, go to db/index right here, so that's the correct path. So the build is fine, and now we need to fix the yarn def because we have error before with the db. So for that, I can't think of any better way to specify any. I don't think of any a good way to resolve the absolute path issues. So one of the trick I normally do is I'm gonna set a no path variable to source, and this is gonna allow us to do absolute import to a subdirectory in a source folder. So the app's running. However, we have the address not found for the DB. That's fine because the DB haven't started yet. So now we have everything in place. We gonna start our Docker compose up -d build and Docker compose logs -f. Okay, so as you can see, we have some errors. They say connection refused, and if you look at this starting order, as you can see here, the database actually, they say here the database actually is ready after the app already start up. This is no good. We want a DB to be ready to accept connections before the app startups. Otherwise, we're gonna have this connection error refuse. So by default, Docker compose depends on basically means that it's gonna start the DB container first. It doesn't guarantee the DB container is ready or not. So as you can look at the log here, start the DB container first here, and then after it, it's gonna run app startup immediately. But after a while, the app's already ready, but the DB is not. So this is known issues. There's some way to make the startup order guaranteed, and actually there's a page on Docker Compose that suggests some solutions, and I'm gonna link that documentation in the description below. And now I'm gonna show you my way of fixing these kind of issues. So the way I do it is I'm gonna modify the Docker file, and I'm gonna add these in. So Docker Compose Wait is a really cool library that help us to guarantee the order of services starting up in Docker Compose. And this basically it just create a wait directory, and chmod plus x basically give the executable ability. And then I'm going to just put a wait here, and inside our .env I'm gonna specify the wait host equal db. Yep, so basically the Docker compose wait's gonna look at the host that you want to wait on, and in this case it's gonna be db5432, and that's it. That's all we need to do. And now if we start this up again, we're gonna see the difference. Okay, so as you can see, Docker compose wait for the DB, and now everything is working. So we got the app starting up after the DB right here. So DB startup and then the app. So this is all good. And also it also run the migration scripts that we add. So how can we check that? Now if you look at here, this container, right? This is container ID for the Postgres. So I'm gonna do docker exec and right, so now I'm in the Postgres container and I need to log into the database. PSQL minus U, and this is going to be the user, which is Postgres, and then the database name. Right, so now I'm in the SQL CLI. If I do it DT, it's going to list all the table. As you can see, it's create a migration table. Let's look at the migration table. Right, so this is the scripts that we add, create table. If you look at here, this is a script that we add and it run at this time, right? So now let's look at the user. Right now there's no row. Now we're gonna make another migration script to check if we restart the service, does it actually rerun this script, rerun the first script, create table or not. I guarantee you, as long as this migration table exists, it's never run the already ran migration scripts. It only run the migration scripts that with a new ID, with the ID that's not inside this migration table yet. So I'm gonna exit this and go back to my code, and I'm gonna make a second migration script. So the first number here, it must be the ID of the migration script. You need to make this unique and in the increasing order. Okay, so here I'm gonna insert into user profile, user ID, name, values, Tom. Alright, so now I'm gonna rerun the app services app. Okay, let's do a docker ps. As you can see, we only rebuilt the app. So now let's log into the database. PSQL minus use Postgres. Now this is the second script they add, and it run at 11:26 p.m. So it doesn't actually rerun the first script. Crazy, right? So now if you select the user profile and insert the record inside the user profile table, so our migration is working. So that's all I have for you today, and hopefully you learned something, and I do too. And thank you guys. If you like this video, give me a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys.